The past 8 years have been emotional brutality in regards to politics. Change, revolution, even actual civil war sentiment that's been espoused in recent years has unfortunately become more common now because of extremists on both sides. You'd think because people seem angry, that may mean voting wouldn't be a popular outlet for that anger, and people would stay home instead. But you'd be wrong. In 2016, 60.1% of Americans voted in the presidential election between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, where both candidates were heavily disliked. And that turnout was up from the 2012 election. In 2020, the turnout number jumped even higher to 66.6%, which was the highest turnout election since 1900. The elections of 2018, 2020, and 2022 were three of the highest turnout elections of their respective types in decades. It shows that even with a disdain of American politics, people still understand the importance of voting and how the naysayers are losing out on important votes that can determine the future of the country. So yes, even between all the doom and gloom everyone has felt from 2016 to today, most of us still understand what is at stake between each election. Voting is the singular most amount of power the average American adult has to wield in this country. And the very forces trying to limit that power or convince others that the power of voting is inconsequential have done more to help the corrupt and powerful more than any business deal or tax cut has. Think about what a huge dub it is for billionaires and corporations to have some privileged person online sitting at home mock the political process and say it's a total waste of time. And they get that publicity for free, so their lobbyists spend less money having to compete with more voters. Many marginalized groups engaging in the US political process, such as women, African Americans, Native Americans, and others, have faced discrimination and roadblocks over centuries like poll taxes, literacy tests, fraud, and intimidation. These groups have fought over the country's history to earn the right to vote and make change no matter how small. Even today, you still have forces trying to suppress the vote, whether it's preventing former felons from voting, banning mail-in voting, or making it harder for minority communities to vote at certain polling areas that may not be open for most of the day. All this is to say that while voting is a given right as an American, it's also a civic duty that many seem to throw away and take for granted in more ways than one. If the very people who have been continuously screwed over for decades can find a way to stand in line in the rain to vote for even the smallest changes, it's hard to fathom sometimes why many refuse to do so. The revolution ain't coming. The chaos everybody expected during the Trump admin to tear down the system and drain the swamp came and went. And now we're here facing many of the same dilemmas we faced in 2016 and 2020. So we have to face the reality that things don't change in an instant. And as a wise man once said, there are decades where nothing happens and there are weeks where decades happen. And that's what the system is to a T. So it seems like we're finally here, election season. And I guess it's no surprise that it being election season, it brings out some of the old classics on social media. You know, the commentary from Gen X to Gen Z about voting, from how pointless voting is to how it doesn't matter because Democrats and Republicans are the same, or how nobody cares about them. If you're one of those folks that struggles to pick a candidate every 4 years or thinks if they don't have the perfect candidate to choose from that they're going to sit this one out, or God forbid look like a clown and vote third party, well, this one's for you. This video is for you. We're going to get down to the basics of the greatest power the average American has with 5 different points, so you'll finally be able to figure out how to vote for the rest of your life. Point 1 is just deciding to vote. People always like to point out during election season how so-and-so candidate is only saying this to get votes or to win over voters, or my favorite one, they always say every 4 years how this is the most important election of our lifetimes. And yeah, that is how elections work. You have to vote every 4 years for the candidates who say stuff you like. And especially today, because of polarization, these elections become more and more important each time. You also have to get up in the morning and go to work and feed yourself for the rest of your life as well. It's what part of being an adult is like. Voting is no different. I'll cut to the chase with this one. You're not going to a voting booth to vote for who makes you happy. You're there to vote for whoever advances your agenda the fastest. That's literally it. Your agenda could be one thing, 3 things, or 5 things, but one candidate is going to hit on more of them than the other. Oh, and you're choosing that one candidate who aligns with you and your agenda the most between the Democrat or Republican candidates. Just remember this. Third-party candidates in general elections only exist as a money laundering scheme. Simple as, no elaboration needed. Point 2, weighing your beliefs over your feelings. Most people go into a general election feeling like it's deciding between a lesser of 2 evils, which is usually the case. But such is life. There will never be a perfect candidate who aligns with you 100%. And the sad truth is sometimes it may not even be 80% or maybe even 50%. Again, you're voting to get most out of what you want. People use their feelings to vote a lot, and why wouldn't they? If you feel bad about the economy or feel like democracy is falling apart and your kids' futures are in flux or the planet is going to hell, then of course you would use that as a way to decide how to vote. It makes sense, but it can also obfuscate clear choices, and I'll explain why. We have a two-party system in America. If you don't believe that or think otherwise, then I don't know what to tell you. You don't like the Democrat or Republican candidate because you don't agree with them 100%? Or is it because you don't think it even matters and they're all the same corporate elitist shills who don't care and your vote means nothing anyway? Even if you have your reasons, your vote is still the most important thing that matters to a politician, especially in an incumbent, because like any job, you don't want to get fired or told you suck by your own constituents, and you want to retain voters. So politicians will use whatever money and influence to buy and keep votes, which makes your vote a bargaining tool. And why primaries are really the more underrated part of the campaigning process, almost as important as winning the presidency. But again, the primaries have largely been decided at this point. The people are speaking that as much as they hate Biden and Trump, they are still better than the field. In 2016, Hillary Clinton ran against Donald Trump, and she looked heavily favored. She would end up losing to Donald Trump in the 2016 election for a multitude of reasons, all of which at the end of the day fall on her. However, for the 1.5 million people who voted for Jill Stein or the 4.5 million people who voted for Gary Johnson, their protest votes could have made the difference, along with some of the 40% of the country who just stayed home. Clinton ended up losing swing states that cost her the election, like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, by a combined 77,000 votes. The problem for those protest voters was that if they supported Bernie Sanders and his vision or any type of progressive action and voted for Jill Stein or Gary Johnson instead, they now allowed Donald Trump to not just win, but appoint a more conservative Supreme Court that would help reject progressive wins in the future and enact conservative laws for decades to come. At the very least, Democrats will argue that voting for Hillary Clinton in 2016 would have stopped the progress Trump made in dismantling democratic beliefs, cutting taxes, and enacting harsher border policies, and caring more about pumping more oil than saving the environment. As for Trump, his supporters were excited about this, and his actions as president vindicated their votes for him, while any and all Jill Stein or Gary Johnson voters who disliked Trump and his vision had to deal with the consequences. Well, let's look at the opposite side of this from the conservative perspective. In 2016, Donald Trump's campaign looked pretty dead in the water after the Access Hollywood tape and various other viral quotes and scandals. Conservatives did not like him as a person. They thought he was a bully, a real estate magnate who didn't care about rural voters, but as polling showed later in the Republican primary and going even closer to the general election in 2016, things began to tighten between himself and Hillary Clinton. Trump was gaining ground, and it was because he not only was able to create a very diehard coalition of supporters with his rhetoric, but even for people who may have disliked Trump, they understood the consequences of a Hillary Clinton presidency. They didn't care Trump was a womanizer, that he lived in a penthouse above Manhattan with a golden toilet, that he looked down upon middle America, that he didn't pay his bills or went bankrupt or any of that. They looked at it as a binary choice. Do I want a businessman as president who seems somewhat moderate to lower my taxes? Or do I want higher taxes under Hillary? Do I want to drill for more oil, or do I want climate change action? Do I want a border wall or not? Do I want to win the war on Christmas, or do I want to let liberals send Santa to Gitmo? In all seriousness, though, this is how Trump haters like Ben Shapiro convinced themselves to vote for an extremely flawed man, and they were rewarded for it with a conservative Supreme Court and lower taxes. Two major tenets of conservative philosophy completely fulfilled on the back of a man who himself used to be a pro-choice Democrat. In 2020, some of these moderate Republican and independent voters went back and asked themselves what was most important to them. Was it the economy? Was it women's rights? Was it the fear of Trump and democracy? An important faction of those who had voted for Trump initially or had voted third party went back and sided with Biden in 2020 after realizing on their ideal vision of what the country should look like and seeing Biden as the normalcy candidate from the Obama days. And Trump did not represent that anymore. 84% of voters in 2020 had already decided their vote by September of that election year, and there were way less third-party voters from this year as well, which proves people can make the choice if they really want to. This is not surprising or uncommon, but another point to show again how important the average swing voter can be. Okay, so we learned in 2016 that Hillary haters and Bernie lovers got zero of what they asked for, and Trump haters and Cruz, Rubio, Kasich lovers got part or most of what they asked for. Now tell me whose feelings made a difference. This is not to say that bowing down to the ruling class and accepting the fate of old white men rule forever should be accepted without fervor. Of course, justice and principles should still be core tenets to any candidate up for office, and we shouldn't blindly support corruption just because they have a D or R next to their name. But unfortunately, polarization has brought us closer to a world where having principles is second to owning the other side, and that's the scary part. Right now, it seems like one side is closer to supporting democratic norms than the other. Yet people will still go to the polls in November asking themselves if that is really enough of importance to them to decide their vote. At the end of the day, everybody has their own priorities, and the candidate who matches them the most will still win, no matter how flawed. Point 3 is about winning. Remember when Trump said,
"We're going to win so much. We're going to win that the people of Missouri are going to go to your governor and they're going to say, 'Governor, please go see the president. We can't stand winning so much.'" Remember?
Well, he may have lied about winning so much, but his view about winning was spot on. Winning is great because it's extremely hard to do consistently in politics. And when you think about the two previous presidents with very strong bases of support, Donald Trump and Barack Obama, their popularity with the base still could not prevent them from losing every midterm by a lot. Because of polarization these days, it's hard for either side to truly make significant inroads to the political system. While certain major pieces of legislation can still be passed, it becomes much harder and much less solidified with such weak majorities that it only leads to incremental change, which leaves much to be desired for a lot of the country. Voters almost always love to cause an impasse on their own accord and want to see both sides work together, which always causes a lot of the ire voters have with the system to begin with, since they elect people who don't want to do this. I know there are a lot of voters who think both Trump and Biden didn't do enough and didn't even enact policy they ran on. I can run through the list of how much both have done for conservatives and liberals alike, so maybe I'll just throw it all down in a link somewhere in the description. But for anybody saying Donald Trump did nothing or Joe Biden did nothing, just hasn't been paying attention. Not everything has to be a grandiose law that is signed in order for things to change in this country, which is why I encourage any voter to research candidates thoroughly before voting. But both candidates got wins for their side and the country, depending on who you ask. But this matters. Point 4 is about change. A big question that would come out of these decisions on who to vote for will be how to make change. What if I vote for Joe Biden or Donald Trump and I don't like them? That's fine, but once the party you voted for is in the White House, that's where the real fighting begins anyway. That's where the protesting begins, the petitions, writing to your congressman, voting for a new congressman, etc., etc. The fight begins once you have the person you can align with the closest in power, so you can help change the course of action. Electing a president is one thing, but dictating the direction of the presidency is actually kind of controllable. It's just that you have a lot of lobbyists and mainstream media against you at some part of the journey, and it's not an easy task to mobilize voters every other year. People get tired of politics and just want to be left alone and not have to worry about their vote all the time. But that has increasingly been a major reason why we are where we are. The best way to make change is within your own party. It has to become internal. Your senator may be up for election in an off year, or your congressperson may know that if they don't support something you voted for the president to do, they will be on the chopping block and you will vote for their primary opponent. Or if they do vote for something that you don't want the president to do, they will also be on the chopping block. And remember, they don't want to leave. They will ask for your donations from corporate donors and go to the galas and parties to raise money so they can convince you to vote for them again. But at the end of the day, you will decide their fate no matter how much money they get. We've seen it happen where older or more experienced members of Congress think their job is safe or they can get away with lacking effort in hearing their constituents. But people like AOC took advantage of that and defeated the Democratic incumbent who had been in Congress for a decade, or Dave Bratt, who defeated the literal Republican House Majority Leader in a midterm election back in 2014. It's possible if you want it to happen and your political beliefs are strong enough, but a lot of times people's strongest beliefs are just wanting to live in peace and not deal with major changes. So it can be hard to see major political reforms enacted in just one presidential term. The system itself is meant to move slowly. It's meant to discourage you and annoy you, anger you, and drive you crazy. It's designed to make you stay home and not care and think everybody is the same and will do what the rich and powerful want at the end of the day. But even for someone like myself who knows how evil politics can be, Voting is the opposite of that bleakness, which is why it hurts to see how many people refuse to do it. All right, we made it. The fifth and final point. Who do I vote for? Well, start with what kind of voter are you? It sounds pretty simple and usually is if you consider yourself a liberal or conservative off the bat. But it has seemingly become harder for some of these people in these camps to decide because of how disliked both Trump and Biden are these days and how polarizing the two parties have become. More and more Americans are registering as independents, and even more Americans may just decide to sit out on election day in November if it comes down to Biden and Trump. So what if you consider yourself in that camp? If you're willing to show up to vote at a polling place or mail in a ballot this year, you are telling the world you have strong enough political beliefs that you got up in the morning to make a decision about who should lead the country. Most hardworking Americans believe in an ideal America, and there's always something government can do or stop doing to make it better. And how you think about this matters. For as unpopular as they are, based on the polls and early results right now, Donald Trump and Joe Biden are both running and winning in their respective primary elections against other candidates who nobody cares or likes enough to make a difference. So they will be the de facto nominees in November, unless one or both of them is seriously ill or dies between now and then, which is actually highly plausible. If you don't like this, then you should have found a better candidate running against Trump than a guy with the personality of a robot and the Republican version of Hillary Clinton. As for Biden, I think he's running against Oprah's palm reader and Dean Phillips, who is a real person in Congress, by the way. I didn't make up a name. But based again on the polling and early results so far, Trump and Biden ain't losing. So you get what you vote for. And right now, these are the two we got. Just because I know I'm going to have to address it anyway, yes, there are third-party candidates still running. If you think voting third-party is fruitful in any way, you might as well vote for your cat or your dog because it's a waste of your time and no third-party or independent candidate in history has ever won a presidential race, and they won't win anytime soon. Robert Kennedy Jr. and Cornel West are running as independent candidates, and Jill Stein is running as a Green Party candidate so far. The only thing a third-party candidate has won at was being the spoiler that everybody blames and hates for the rest of their life when the Republican or Democrat candidate loses a close election. So not only do you lose, but then everybody scapegoats you for why the Democrat or Republican lost instead of the real reasons of the Democrat or Republican being a bad candidate. Also, if a third-party candidate won, they would assume the White House with a split Congress with no coalition and get nothing done. Needless to say, neither of these third-party folks have been outpolling Trump or Biden and haven't even come close. So in the words of Logan Roy,
You are not serious people.
third-party candidates are a vote sink, a cash sink, and voters get sucked into the facade every 4 years thinking they are making a difference or showing the country they want the system to change. Newsflash, it makes you look dumb, and it hasn't changed things for the better, and arguably it has made things worse. So if you've accepted the premise, then this video becomes pretty straightforward. So here's how the two parties stack up. Democrats pull well on things like climate change, healthcare, abortion, and gun safety. If you care most about climate change, affordable healthcare, LGBTQ rights, gun safety, abortion rights, unions, and education, then you should look at what Joe Biden has actually done on those things. Has it been enough or not? Can he do more? That's up for you to decide. But if you care about those issues, this is the candidate. Nobody else will get you any closer to these things. I get it. Joe Biden is old and hasn't canceled every penny of student loan debt. Things between Israel and Palestine aren't getting much better. But is his loss going to make that prospect more possible or less possible? Think of the alternative here. On the other hand, Republicans poll well on things like border security and immigration, as well as the economy and crime. If you care about lower taxes, less regulation, stricter border security and immigration laws, and more populist America First policies, you should look at what Donald Trump did in his first term to address those things. Was it enough or not? But again, if you care about those issues, then he is the candidate you should vote for. Yes, Donald Trump is old and has been embroiled in scandal after scandal, but if being pro-life matters to you more than anything else, does his loss help your cause or hurt it? We've seen in the past decade how swing voters decide elections, and swing voters literally go through this exact process either months beforehand or literally the hour before voting. What do I care about the most? which candidate is the best person to get this done, and can I trust them to do it? If you have 2 or 3 strongly held beliefs, you have to start to think about which candidate between the Democrat and Republican can get you closer to your ideal final outcome, or even which candidate will not be as bad for your ideal outcomes in 1 or more instances, which sounds crazy. Why would you have to decide between which candidate sucks less? Again, we have a 2-party system, separation of powers, shitty Congress, Supreme Court, etc., etc. It's easy to become disillusioned during the process when you realize how many pieces of the puzzle outside the presidency also matter. But that can be for another video. For now, you just have to focus on 2 candidates. Remember which ones align closer to your beliefs, not your feelings, and that's an important difference. So, if this has helped you understand voting better, then great. If you're still in the camp where you feel like it doesn't matter and voting third party or staying at home makes you feel forthright and not part of the system, well, you're still part of the system like everybody else. The choice every 4 years is to either change things from the inside or deal with the consequences from the outside. For as much talk as we hear from conservatives or progressives about instead of voting, they're going to bring revolution to the streets or civil war is coming, there hasn't been much of any of that to make a difference. So for the adults in the room, the choice is all yours. Based on the recent turnout from the past few elections, more people may still think they're another cog in the machine, but they may still have a shot to make the machine better, while the rest refuse to be a cog and accept the choice that's been made for them. That guy or gal you despise who posts all over their social media about voting for Trump or voting for Biden in 2024, they're going to get what they want one way or the other. So, do you want to be part of the winners or sit back with the losing side being blamed the whole time for 4 straight years?